Hello and welcome to a rather unusual episode of Fully Charged. Now, actually it's now months ago, we asked our Patreon supporters to, if there's a burning question they've never really had answered about electric vehicles or renewable energy or any of the related topics we talk about, to record themselves asking that question, send it in, and we're going to do an Ask Robert Anything episode. So that could obviously be a little bit risky if I go off topic, but I'm really going to try not to. So this is Ask Robert Anything, and this is Fully Charged. Now, the more observant of you may recognise this location. I came here quite a few times in the very early days of Fully Charged. I would drive the Mitsubishi i-MiEV to this location, which is on a sort of distant hill. And that's where I recorded a lot of the first sort of thoughts and ideas about electric vehicles 10 years ago. So I thought it was kind of appropriate to come back here and at least start this episode here. So here's the first question.
Hi Robert, when do you think we will see a AC Type 2 vehicle to grid standard?
So the question was very specifically about Type 2 connectors to be used as vehicle to grid connection systems. So a Type 2 is the most common charging system that electric cars have, particularly in Europe, but also it's increasingly around the world. And it's the thing you can plug in at your home. So you have a Type 2 socket on the wall that an electrician fits, and you plug a wire into that and the other end into the car, and all cars have a Type 2 connection. All new cars available around the world now do have that. There were some rumours recently that Tesla had in fact developed a vehicle to grid system that uses Type 2 because someone had taken a Tesla apart and found unusual wiring. I reported that, and I was wrong to report that because I didn't check the story that happened the next day, which completely disproved it. So Tesla aren't doing that. That's nonsense. But I think it's possible, and it makes a lot of sense that we use Type 2. It's just the most common, and it's the most simple to use. And also, you don't want to be able to send huge amounts of electricity back into the grid or into your house. You don't need it. There's nothing in your house that uses as much electricity in a few seconds as this car does when you're accelerating with it. That's the important thing to remember. You want to be able to trickle some electricity in to run your fridge, your tumble dryer, your cooker, your lights, and that you can run off the car for some days in the event of a power failure. But what you can also do is buy electricity when it's cheap and sell it when it's expensive using your car. That's the critical thing.
Hi, Fully Charged Show, it's Veronica here. We're currently looking to renew our leases on cars because they're up for renewal now. I drive a Passat GTE, my husband drives a Nissan Leaf. My question is, why is it virtually impossible to get hold of a light interior UK spec car? For example, the Nissan Leaf, dark interior, and the new Ford Mach-E is also dark interior. Thank you.
Okay, so we did a little bit of research about this just to work out how common it was, because I was a bit confused by the question because, and I'll show you why, this is the interior colour of the Nissan Leaf that I got in 2011, and as you can see it's light. The seats are light. I'm going to modify that. The seats were light when we got it. It was a very light coloured interior. It is quite unusual. Now, what we were told by Nissan is that light interiors are very popular in Asian countries and not popular in European countries. European people like a dark interior, Asian people like a light interior. Who knew? So it is quite hard to get a light interior Nissan Leaf, for example, in the UK. And as far as we can tell, and we've asked a few people, just wait for this road in the pre-lockdown days was totally deserted. You might see one tractor go up it. I'm stupidly shooting this on a Sunday and I live in the Cotswolds. It's tourist mayhem. Light interiors, very uncommon in European cars, basically. That's the way it is. I'm sure you must be able to order them. For instance, with a Tesla, you can order a light interior. All the initial Tesla Model 3s, I remember when they first came over, all had white interiors, which I really didn't want. So I prefer a dark interior, simply because I've seen what happens with a light interior after 10 years. It needs a bit of a wet wipe.
Hello Robert, I've just thought of a question. How does 40% of us be able to charge an electric vehicle when we don't have access to a driveway? Hopefully you can help.
So this question, I think, is going to be the really big one in the next sort of 4 or 5 years as electric cars really become more and more common. Here's my initial reaction to it. So you live somewhere where you can't drive your car off the road and plug it in. When this car came out 10 years ago, it was pretty critical because this car did not go very far on one charge. And if you couldn't charge it at home, it meant every day you'd have to find somewhere to plug it in. It would have been a real pain. And back then there was nowhere to plug it in. So, you know, that was very difficult. That has changed a lot. One of the reasons is if you buy a Nissan Leaf now, it goes about 3 times further than this one ever could, sometimes even more than that. So around 150 to 200 miles of range in a car is kind of enough. And I mean, there are numerous cars which will do 250, 300 miles on a charge. You would only charge those once a week for 50 of the 52 weeks of the year. For all your commuting, your shopping, your school runs, all that stuff. You just don't need to charge it. But here's the important thing. There are more and more solutions coming through which mean that you can charge it much easier. So one of the really interesting ones we've just been dealing with is a group called Co-Charger, co-charger.com, because they are organising a sort of peer-to-peer trading system where if there's someone up the road from you that does have an off-street charging facility, you can go and use that. You pay for it, and the person whose house the charger is on gets paid for the electricity that you've used. So neither they're not out of pocket, and you still have to pay for your, but you've got somewhere reliable. You could leave the car overnight, charge it overnight. There's also lots and lots of street charging systems that are coming. I've used them in London. Ubertricity put all these sockets in lampposts, and when you use that, I just plugged a car in there late one night, left it in the morning, it was full. It was kind of easy, and I went, that is not that bad, and it costs more than it would if you were at home, but not that much more. So there are solutions coming. In the longer term, things like induction charging, which don't require wires or any posts or anything, you know, that is going to become more and more plausible. There's a lot of companies now that are developing that sort of system. So that would mean you park your car on the side of the street and there's a charge point underneath the road. You can't even see it, and your car starts charging as soon as you park it. That's going to take a while. That's going to take longer, but it is going to come. Just park it and it'll go pling and it'll start charging.
Hello, Robert. Love the show. When do you think we'll see the first pure EV family estate car?
A lot of people have asked this. You know, the two things a lot of people want is a car that can tow and estate cars. Well, MG are launching an absolute classic estate car, station wagon, they're called in America. The MG Estate is going to be available later this year. If it's anything like the MG ZE, which we've test driven on this show, the signs are going to be very good. It's quite cheap, it's very reliable, it's really well made. I've now know 3 or 4 people who've got MGs and they love them. They absolutely love them. So that's a very good sign. Next question.
What happens when an electric car goes through a puddle? A deep puddle, I mean.
Now, I really love this one. It's a really important one because people don't know. There was apparently a great deal of fear a few years ago about taking an electric car into a car wash. Would it be okay, and would you be electrocuted if you went in a drive-through car wash in an electric car? It's very easy to mock that sort of fear because, you know, it's pretty obvious if you can drive a car in the rain, then it's going to be quite waterproof, and it is a very important part of car construction, and they test it. I've been in where they finished making the car. One of the things they do, they drive it into a big box, and water is squirted at it from all angles at incredibly high pressure so they can see if it's got any leaks, because clearly it's not good if it does. So yes, you can drive an electric car through a puddle. Quite a deep puddle, as you can see in this footage. This is an early Nissan Leaf having a water test where it drives through. So an important thing to know is a petrol or diesel car has to breathe, a bit like you and me. So it has to suck air in to make the engine work. And so where that air gets sucked into the engine is very important. If it's low down and you drive through deep water, then you basically break the engine. An electric motor doesn't need any air. As long as it's sealed so that the wires that do have electricity going through them are waterproof, you can submerge an electric motor completely in water and it's absolutely fine. It'll still work. So yes, you can drive through very deep water in an electric vehicle, probably deeper than you can in a petrol or diesel car. You've got to be careful because, you know, it's deep water. And if you don't know what's underneath the ground and you're driving through deep water, you may get into very deep water, which isn't good.
Okay, so you want a quick question. So we've got the cars. One Zoe, one Kona, one nice charging point. The only slight problem we have, although we've got a lovely sunny day, our house has dormer windows. on the first floor, and therefore we can't get any solar panels on. So, Robert, where are we with solar roof tiles? Love to hear from you.
So this I get asked a lot. Basically, there's a lot of old housing stock. We've got a huge housing legacy, particularly in Europe, of old buildings that are totally and utterly unsuitable to have solar panels put on the roof. So there's two alternatives, I think. And looking at where you were when you asked that question, one is a solar carport, so a very simple structure. It's much easier to get planning permission to put an open building, not like an enclosed garage or a shed, and then have the chargers and the inverter underneath that you can charge your cars from that, and also put power into the house. That's one alternative. The other is solar roof tiles, which, yeah, we've heard a lot about Tesla solar roof tiles. There are numerous examples of them fitted on houses. That is a big operation, you know. So if you were going to replace the tiles on a roof anyway, because of the age of them and they're decrepit, then that's a really good thing to check the cost differential between normal tiles and solar roof tiles. It's not that huge, and that would make a massive difference, truly massive difference. But if you're not planning to do that, if you don't have to replace your roof, I think it's an indulgence at the moment. As I was lucky with my roof because I had a south-facing uninterrupted, there was no shade on it, an uninterrupted south-facing roof. It wasn't planned, it was just fluke that we got that. We could have built, and I built that building without any consideration about solar panels. So it was just lucky, half of the roof was south-facing.
Hi Robert, my name's Kiri, and me and my partner recently went to test drive the new electric Corsa, which we loved apart from the price. So my question to you is this: when do you think electric cars like the electric Corsa are going to come in line price-wise with their petrol counterparts?
Now this is a really critically important question, and it's one I've addressed numerous times on the show. And it's a really dangerous, slippery slope of conspiracy theories, and I don't want to go down there. But there are some indications that big established motor manufacturers, the really big companies we've all heard of around the world, are artificially increasing the price of electric cars so they don't directly compete with the massive amount of diesel and petrol cars that they have to sell to keep going. And it's a really difficult transition. There's no question that in the long term, an electric car will be cheaper in its lifetime. Okay, I'm going to go even back. It already is cheaper in its lifetime. This car is so much cheaper than any other hatchback that's done the same amount of miles over the same amount of time.
Hi, Robert. My question: if you were the Prime Minister of England, what would you do that isn't being done already? Or if you prefer, same question, but you were the President of the United States. Thank you.
This is something I'm so grateful that I have no ambition to be the Prime Minister or the President of any country or anything like that. What would I do if it wasn't already being done? I mean, I think it's actually not so much transport, because it's going to change itself in a way. So there are some really good, in this country, in the United Kingdom, some very good incentives to encourage people to use electric vehicles. You get some money off the cost price of buying it. There are subsidies for charge points, so commercial companies can get money to help them put in charge points in their car parks. You can get a grant to put a charge point in your house. New buildings are going to have more and more charge points fitted to them, which is a really good thing. It just becomes an automatic part of the house. That stuff is very good. Where I would really go to town, were I in a position of power, I would be really pressuring the building industry to try and at least move into the early part of the 21st century. It is about time that we started building houses properly, in particular, and commercial properties that generated more power than they consume. It's easily done now, there's no excuse. So that would be a real priority with me. I would do everything I could to encourage people not to drive cars, to ride bicycles, to walk, to use public transport. Much more. That's the most efficient way of moving human body along the road, is what you just saw then, that bloke on his bike. That is brilliant. That is the least amount of kilowatt hours per mile that you can possibly do other than walking. So, I would want to encourage people to redesign cities so that they facilitate that. And, you go, oh, I mean, I'm like that too. I'm a fair weather cyclist. I don't like cycling in the rain. What about covered cycleways? That they were covered in solar panels so that when you're riding along them and it's raining, you're not in the full rain all the time. That could be done. It's not impossible. So more cycle lanes, more separate bicycles from cars, really important. Minimise the use of cars in cities. Minimise the ownership of cars in cities. We don't want our streets cluttered up with useless cars sitting around there all day not doing anything. What an ugly world we've made for ourselves. So let's change that. Let's get rid of cars from cities and have nice trees and flowers and plants like this.
Hi Robert, do Arrival have any working prototypes? Because I've only seen still photos.
So Arrival are a very interesting company. We don't know yet. We've been talking to them a great deal. We're definitely doing a lot of stuff with them this year. We were going to be doing it now, but obviously we haven't been able to. So we will find out very shortly whether Arrival are actually building physical vehicles as opposed to really good Photoshop ones. I've got a fairly confident suspicion they are. They have enormous amounts of orders for electric delivery vans, and I think this is where we're going to see the big change much quicker. Electric delivery vans, last mile delivery options. You know, when you've ordered from Amazon or other online retailers and your package gets delivered, it'll come in an electric van. It already does in many instances, but that's going to become more and more common, and then it'll be standard. Plus, we are actually going to do a van series. We're already shooting some of it, so we're going to be looking at every single possible van that's available, and there are a surprisingly large amount.
Why are we relying on the government to pay for public electric vehicle infrastructure?
So that is quite an interesting question. It's very political, obviously. You know, why do we rely on the government to, as I've mentioned before, even in these questions, to subsidise the installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure or the cars themselves? And it's very important to know the role that governments have in the world, and particularly in relation to energy, because it's definitely their job to make sure we all have a constant electricity supply, for instance. If we suddenly got loads of power cuts, then whatever government was in power would become less and less popular. In order to do that, the government supply enormous subsidies to the energy companies. For the nuclear industry, the vast majority of it goes to the nuclear industry. It is about 94% of government subsidies to the energy industry goes to nuclear, mainly to look after the waste. We are paying for that. Taxpayers, numpties like us, are paying for that. I want people to complain about that a little bit more than the tiny amount, in terms of national expenditure, the tiny amount that goes on subsidies for electric car charge points.
Hello, I want to know the difference between solar panels and solar roofs. Thank you.
The difference between solar panels and solar roof tiles, there's a little bit of guesswork going on here because we've not had any, certainly I've not had any direct experience of the solar roof tiles. It's still a very emerging technology. There are people who are making solar roof tiles that are not Tesla. I think that's an important point. So the advantages, obviously, of solar roof tiles is it's just a roof. And while it's just a roof and it's sunny, it's generating electricity for your home or for the grid. From all the research that we can find, it's clear that solar roof tiles are much stronger than regular roof tiles. So in the event of sort of a hailstorm or something like that, your solar roof tiles will survive a lot better. They're less obtrusive, they don't look as weird, they're not like added on top of the roof, they are the roof. So all those things are great advantages. I'm still dubious because I think you can design a roof, if you're building a new building, you can design a roof where the solar panels just become they are the roof effectively. That is happening more and more. Some of them are transparent, so you can have light in the room that's inside there, and they can be insulated to make that possible. But they're definitely, per square meter, a solar panel will produce more than solar roof tiles. And in terms of installation, ease of installation, hugely easier. So if you think each individual roof tile has got to have an electrical connection to some kind of grid, that's a spider in my ear.
My whole family is very fortunate to be able to cycle commute to it, so we tend to only use our car for leisure purposes, including canoeing and kayaking. So my question is, what's the likely reduction in range if we put a canoe on the roof of an electric car? I know that for my dodgy diesel we get a reduction of about 15 to 20% in range, but obviously EVs are more aerodynamic, so the impact may be greater.
Now this is a good one because clearly when you get a car out of a showroom, it's designed to be as aerodynamically efficient as possible, and you start sticking stuff on it and it will reduce that efficiency. So a canoe is quite a big lumpy thing, although it's kind of smooth and aerodynamic because it's designed to go through water smoothly. But I imagine putting them on the roof is going to make a difference. Well, the only place we could find any reference to this was a Tesla owner in British Columbia in Canada who has a roof box on his Tesla Model 3, and he did some tests to see how much less efficient it was with the roof box on the top of it. And it looks like it's between 12 and 15% less efficient than with no roof box. With a roof rack, just the rack and nothing on it, it was about 5% less efficient. And with a roof box, which is, you've got to remember, is designed to be aerodynamically efficient, as those boxes you put on the roof of your car, was about 15. So I would say a canoe is going to add or reduce the efficiency by between 15 and 20%.
Hi Robert, what do you plan to replace your oil-fired boiler with?
So this is one of my projects for this year. Everything has been delayed, as we know, but there are now available electric boilers, effectively, that can directly replace the gas boiler you have in your house. So you don't need to re-plumb anything, you don't need to redesign your heating system. You can still use a wet heating system, which is, I didn't even know that's what it's called. But I think the key thing that I'm really excited about, and it's a company we featured on Fully Charged for, is heat batteries. SunAmp produce these amazing heat batteries that turn solar power, excess solar power, into heat, store that heat until you need it, and then put it into, so for instance with your central heating. But you can also store energy when it's cheap in the winter at night, and use that energy during the day, that heat energy, to heat your home during the day. There's also things like heat pumps, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, which I'm also interested in looking at, which, you know, also incredibly more efficient than burning gas. Now, the last question. Somehow I managed to forget that when I was recording out in the car. So I'm going to answer it now. Here is the last question.
Hi Robert, how big do you think wind turbines will be in the future?
What a brilliant question. It is such an exciting development in technology, isn't it? It is amazing. So those wind turbines that were behind you when you filmed that question were probably between 500 kilowatts and 1 megawatt. Not that much. That's quite small by today's standards. So the big wind turbines that we're now installing on land, mostly in Scotland, let's be honest, but all over the country, they are between 2 and 5 megawatts. And those are big. 5 megawatts is a huge wind turbine to have on land. Out at sea, they're much bigger. So they already have installed wind turbines out at sea with blades. Each individual blade is like 70 or 80 meters long. Just mind-bogglingly huge. And they can produce up to 10 megawatts. One wind turbine producing 10 megawatts. Then what's happening now is really extraordinary. So what is interesting is when they're going to reach their maximum physical limit, when the laws of physics kick in, it means you just cannot make something bigger. But they haven't reached that yet. So Siemens have just announced a 14 megawatt wind turbine. The nacelle that sits on the top of one of those big towers, which is where the blades are connected to, that huge box at the top, that weighs 500 tons. And the reason we can't put wind turbines that big on land is because we can't get the blades to the location where they are. You can't drive them along the road. They're just too big to transport over land. You've got to put them on a ship and take them out to sea. It's all too big. The rotor diameter is 222 meters. So each individual blade is over 100 meters long, about 108 meters long. It's just hard to even imagine how absolutely enormous that is. Yet again, one of the things we were going to do this year was go out into the North Sea on one of the massive installation ships which have huge cranes that can lift up thousands of tons, that install these wind turbines. And we were going to go and film that. Well, of course, we haven't been able to. So hopefully one day we will. One of the ways of calculating it is one rotation of the blades produces enough electricity for one house for a day. Just one rotation. You've got to remember they're turning all the time. Well, on the biggest ones, one rotation produces enough electricity for 10 houses for one day. One rotation. So every time it rotates, that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 houses. So in a day, it's producing enough electricity for thousands of houses. It's absolutely extraordinary. Brilliant question, thank you. It's time to stop burning stuff. That's really what Fully Charged is all about. Anyway, that's all the questions. Thank you so much for sending them in. All the people who sent in the questions, it was really good of you. Really appreciate it. I hope that some of the answers are of use to some of you. You know, we'll try and do this again sometime. It's quite interesting. It's challenging for us. We've got to find out the answers. And that's it. Please do subscribe to Fully Charged. Please look at the Patreon link if you feel of a mind. And as always, if you have been, thank you for watching.